Think you know corn, popcorn at the movies, corn on the cob at a summer barbecue, maybe a bag of tortilla chips, a can in the pantry. You think corn is something you choose to eat. Here is the part nobody tells you. Corn is in the ketchup on your burger. It is in your soda. It is in the vitamins you take every morning. It is in the coating on the bottom of your frozen pizza. It is in the feed that raised the chicken you had for dinner, the beef in your sandwich, and the salmon you ordered at a restaurant thinking you were being healthy. 3 out of every 4 products in the average American grocery store contain corn in some form. You are eating it right now, almost certainly, and you have no idea. And here is the stranger part. This did not happen by accident. It happened because one man, in 1 decade, made one decision that reshaped the American food supply for 50 years and counting. It happened because a government decided to bury a crop so deep inside the food system that you could spend your whole life eating it without ever once seeing it. But before we get to that man and that decision, we need to go back 9,000 years to a place in the mountains of western Mexico where corn did not yet exist, where it could not exist, where the plant that would eventually feed billions of people was a scrawny wild grass that you would not recognize and probably would not bother to pick. Before we go any further, drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you are watching from right now. I read every single one. 9,000 years ago, in the Balsas River Valley of what is now the state of Guerrero in Mexico, people were foraging in the highlands for something to eat. Among the plants they found was a wild grass called teosinte. If you saw teosinte today, you would walk right past it. The ear of teosinte is smaller than your pinky finger. It holds between 5 and 12 kernels, each one encased in a shell so hard it could crack a tooth. There is no husk. There is almost no flavor. 5 kernels, a shell hard enough to break a tooth. And out of that, someone decided to build a civilization. Season after season, year after year, generation after generation, the people of the Balsas Valley kept the plants that grew bigger, the plants with more kernels, the plants with softer shells. They had no scientific vocabulary for what they were doing. They had no understanding of genetics. They were simply choosing the best of what they had and planting its seeds the following spring. What they built, over thousands of years of patient, invisible labor, is one of the greatest feats of biological engineering in human history. By the time Mesoamerican civilizations were rising, they had turned a useless wild grass into what we now call maize. The Aztec, the Maya, the Olmec, all of them built their economies, their religions, and their empires on a crop that their ancestors had essentially invented from scratch. The Aztec called it centli. They paid taxes in it. They stored it in vast granaries. They used it to feed armies. Their creation stories said that human beings were made from corn dough. This was not metaphor. This was theology. Corn was not just food. Corn was the reason people existed. And by the standards of what the Aztec knew about corn, which was a great deal, it was extraordinary. They had developed hundreds of varieties, adapted to different climates, different altitudes, different uses. They knew how to grow it, how to store it, how to prepare it. And they had discovered something about corn that the rest of the world would take 400 years to figure out the hard way. Corn contains niacin, vitamin B3. Your body needs niacin to function. Without it, you get a disease called pellagra. And pellagra, if it goes far enough, will kill you. Here is the problem. The niacin in corn is bound up inside the kernel in a form the human body cannot absorb. It is there, but it is locked. You can eat corn every day for a year and still die of niacin deficiency because your body cannot reach the niacin that is right in front of it. The Aztec had solved this problem 3,200 years before any European scientist understood it existed. The solution is a process called nixtamalization. You take dried corn kernels and you soak them in an alkaline solution, traditionally water, mixed with slaked lime or wood ash. You let them sit. You rinse them. The alkaline solution breaks open the chemical bonds holding the niacin in place. Suddenly, the niacin is free. Suddenly, the corn is nutritionally complete. That alkaline soak is why the Aztec could build a civilization on corn for thousands of years, and why the rest of the world could not. The tortilla chip in your pantry right now has been through this process. The corn syrup in your soda has not. One of them was made the way the Aztec understood corn had to be made. The other was not. In 1492, Christopher Columbus landed in the Americas and encountered corn. Within a generation, corn had spread to Europe, Africa, and Asia. It grew fast, produced abundantly, and required less labor than wheat. For the poor of Spain, Italy, and eventually the American South, it looked like a miracle crop. Columbus brought the corn. He did not bring the nixtamalization. European observers watched the indigenous people soak their corn in lime water and assumed it was a local preference, a cultural habit, something you did for flavor, or texture, or tradition, not something you did to survive. They took the plant and left the knowledge on the shore, and that is where it gets dark. Because what came next was not just a tragedy, it was a preventable catastrophe that played out over 3 centuries, on 2 continents, in slow motion. The disease arrived quietly. It moved through corn-eating communities the way hunger moves, gradually, then everywhere at once. The first symptom is a skin rash, a rough, scaly darkening of the skin on the hands and neck, on any part of the body exposed to sunlight, dermatitis, then diarrhea, then something harder to describe, a fog that settles over the mind, a dulling of thought, a loosening of the grip on reality, dementia, and then, in the worst cases, death. 4 Ds. Dermatitis, diarrhea, dementia, death. That was the progression of pellagra, and for the people living through it in the American South in the early 20th century, no one knew what it was or what caused it. By 1912, South Carolina alone had 30,000 cases. The death rate in that state reached 40% of those diagnosed. Pellagra was the second most common cause of death in South Carolina that year. At its peak across the United States, the epidemic was producing more than 250,000 cases of illness and 7,000 deaths every single year, almost all of them in the rural South, almost all of them in poor communities, where corn was the dietary foundation. 7,000 Americans dying every year from something they were eating, and the food that was killing them is still in your kitchen today, still processed the same way, just mixed into enough other things that you cannot taste it anymore. The medical establishment had a theory. Pellagra was infectious. It spread from person to person, probably through some kind of germ. Doctors searched for the pathogen, they quarantined patients, they disinfected houses. None of it worked, because the disease was not in the air or the water or the soil. It was in the absence of one molecule in a diet built almost entirely on corn that had never been nixtamalized. One man saw this. His name was Joseph Goldberger, a physician with the United States Public Health Service. Goldberger noticed something that seemed obvious in retrospect, but that everyone else had missed. In the institutions where pellagra was worst, the nurses and doctors did not get sick. Only the patients did. If pellagra were truly infectious, the staff would be at risk. They were not. Goldberger concluded that pellagra was a dietary disease. He redesigned the meals in a Mississippi orphanage where pellagra was epidemic, adding meat, eggs, and dairy, and the pellagra disappeared. He was dismissed. He was ridiculed. The medical community told him his methodology was flawed, his conclusions were wrong, and that he was insulting the South by implying that poverty was the cause. So Goldberger went further. He organized what he called filth parties, gatherings at which he and his colleagues injected themselves with blood taken from pellagra patients, swallowed capsules of their skin flakes, rubbed their nasal secretions on their own mucous membranes. Goldberger did not get pellagra. Neither did any of his colleagues. The disease was not infectious. The proof was unambiguous. He was still mostly ignored. Goldberger died in 1929 without ever seeing his work accepted. It was not until 1937 that scientists confirmed pellagra was caused by niacin deficiency. And it was not until World War II, when the government began fortifying flour with niacin as part of the war effort, that pellagra finally faded. The answer had been sitting in Mesoamerican kitchens for 3,000 years. A lime soak. a process so old it predated every European nation, and it took the American food system until 1942 to stumble toward the same conclusion. By then, more than 100,000 Americans had died. After a century of corn killing people who did not know how to eat it, the American government's answer was to grow more of it. After the war, American agriculture entered an era of expansion unlike anything that had come before. New machinery, new fertilizers, new pesticides. Farmers could produce more corn per acre than anyone in history, and in 1961, Japanese scientists developed a way to use enzymes to convert cornstarch into high fructose corn syrup, a liquid sweetener that was cheaper than cane sugar, easier to work with in industrial food production, and, for manufacturers, almost irresistibly economical. Then came 1971, and the man, Earl Butz, became Secretary of Agriculture under President Nixon at a moment when food prices were rising and political pressure was high. Butz had a philosophy that was simple and blunt and would reshape American farming for the next 5 decades. Get big or get out, he told American farmers to plant corn fence-row to fence-row. From one end of your land to the other, plant as much as you can. He eliminated the programs that had paid farmers not to plant all their land, programs designed to keep supply from crashing prices. Instead, Butz replaced them with direct government payments to corn farmers for any shortfall in the market price. No matter how much corn was produced, no matter how low the price fell, the government would make up the difference. The incentive to stop growing was gone. The incentive to grow more was total. American corn production exploded, and because there was so much corn, and because corn was so cheap, the food industry found new uses for it everywhere it looked. High fructose corn syrup, which had been a promising but niche product in the 1960s, became the dominant sweetener in American food and beverages through the 1980s. From 1970 to 1990, consumption of high fructose corn syrup in the United States increased by 1,000%. Today, it represents 40% of all non-calorie-free sweeteners added to food in America. It is in virtually every soft drink sold in this country. If you have had a soda today, you have had high fructose corn syrup. If you have had ketchup, bread, salad dressing, or cereal, you have almost certainly had it. Your body is running, in part, on the result of a policy set in 1971. But the strangest part of all of this is not what Butz put into the food supply. It is what he put into the food supply that you still cannot see. Studies have found that countries using high fructose corn syrup in their food supply have a 20% higher prevalence of type 2 diabetes than countries that do not. The connection is contested, the mechanisms are debated, but the numbers are there. And while the corn syrup was spreading through the food supply, the corn itself was spreading through the livestock system. Corn-fed beef replaced grass-fed beef as the American standard, because corn was cheap enough to make indoor feedlot operations economically viable. Corn-fed chicken, corn-fed pigs, even corn-fed farmed fish, species that would never eat corn in the wild, fed on corn-based pellets, because corn was cheaper than anything else. Meanwhile, the small family farms that Butz had told to get big or get out were, mostly, getting out. Between 1970 and the present, hundreds of thousands of small farms have closed. The government that presided over all of this spent $73 billion on corn subsidies between 1995 and the mid-2000s, while spending almost nothing on subsidizing fruit and vegetable production. The cheapest corn derivatives, the ones with the lowest nutritional value and the highest caloric density, flowed straight into the processed food that lines the interior aisles of every grocery store in America. So here is where that leaves you. 90 million acres of corn are planted in the United States every year. Less than 1% of it is sweet corn, the kind you eat on the cob. The rest becomes ethanol, corn syrup, cornstarch, corn oil, animal feed, and the hundreds of derivatives you find on ingredient labels under names you may not recognize: maltodextrin, dextrose, ascorbic acid, xanthan gum, citric acid, the bun on your burger, the beef inside it, the cheese on top, the soda next to it, all of it touched by corn, in one form or another, in ways you were never told. You are not choosing to eat corn. Corn is being chosen for you by a man named Earl Butz, by a decision made in 1971 that nobody voted on. If there is one thing I take from the story of corn, it is this. The people who first cultivated this plant understood something about it that took the rest of the world centuries to learn. They knew that corn had to be prepared a certain way, that the process was as important as the plant, that the knowledge of how to use it was inseparable from the food itself. When that knowledge was separated from the crop, people died. We have spent the last 50 years making the same kind of mistake in a different form. We took a crop that can feed people, and we buried it inside a food system designed not around nutrition, but around economics. We subsidized abundance without asking what kind of abundance we were building. The Aztec did not have a word for high fructose corn syrup. They had 3,000 years of knowledge about how to make corn feed a civilization without killing it. That knowledge is still out there. The tortilla on your plate has been nixtamalized. The corn syrup in your soda has not. You can taste the difference. Most people just do not know they are tasting it. If this story changed the way you think about what is on your plate, that is exactly what this channel is here for. Every meal hides a story you were never told. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one. And drop a comment below telling me what food you want us to uncover next. I read every one.